Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to RAC's F-gas question time, our annual discussion about the F-gas regulation and what it will mean for the industry, what it will mean for all of us. I think we've been doing this for over 10 years now, but rarely have we seen quite as much controversy to discuss as we have before us today with the latest proposals from the EU for what they would like to see. I'm thrilled, delighted to have our foremost experts in the F-gas arena to try and unpack this for us. And we'll hear from Ray Gluckman in a minute, from Graham Fox, and we have a fair cavalcade of experts from across the supply chain to be our panelists, and we'll hear from them later. We can't put on these events without the help of sponsors, and we're delighted once again that Chemours is sponsoring this event. We'll hear from Mark Hughes later in the programme. As I say, there's plenty of expertise on hand, but we can't have a question time without questions. So I exhort you to use the Q&A button and put your questions in. Don't use the chat button for questions because we will ignore them. The other key thing to say is don't do questions that are too long and too many paragraphs, because as soon as you hit return, it'll fire the question off. And the record for split questions is someone who sent in 6 bits of the same question. Makes it very difficult as chairman. And you will hear this phrase probably 6 times a day. Without further ado, we will hand over to our first speaker. It's the undoubted Mandarin of F-gas. It's Ray Gluckman. So over to you, Ray.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
That's great. And good morning, everybody. Let me just share my screen, and hopefully you are seeing my slides.
All good.
Yeah, so as Andrew says, it's been a lot of years we've been doing this question time, and the agenda this year is more exciting than most, because these revisions, particularly to the EU regulation, are getting quite close. And that's most of what I'm going to talk about this morning. So what I'll do in the next 15 minutes is just a very brief review about what's changed in the last year, since we had a meeting like this last May, and then I'll concentrate really on the European Commission proposal. So in terms of the existing regulations in both EU and UK, what's changed? We had, of course, already last January 2021, a big quota cut, 55% cut from the baseline. But I haven't heard things on the grapevine that cut has caused any significant stress to the supply of refrigerants. We've got 2 new bans that started at the beginning of this year. Both have a GWP threshold of 150. They both relate to commercial refrigeration. So the 2 bans are the small standalone hermetically sealed systems can no longer use refrigerants with a GWP above 150, and larger multi-pack central systems, if they're over 40 kilowatts, need to be also below GWP 150. The market, just the trend is continuing. These 2 bullets I used last year, there is a continuing introduction of lots of new equipment on offer with the lower GWP gases, and the market for reclaimed and recycled refrigerants is getting stronger. Of course, the big news is that as far as the EU regulation is concerned, a formal proposal has been published, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And then finally, on the Kigali front, it's been fairly slow. Last year's slide said 120 ratifications, and so we've only had another 11 in a whole year, bearing in mind out of 197 countries. The good news is that the 2 biggest countries in the world have ratified in the last 12 months, India and China. The US is the next biggest that hasn't ratified yet, but just a week or two ago, a Senate committee recommended ratification, and it was a bipartisan committee. So there's a hope that in the next few weeks, possibly, the US will ratify. But with US politics, who knows? The next steps under the current regulation, just a reminder really, is that the next cut in quota is in a little less than 2 years' time, and it will be a 69% cut from the original baseline. And the effective cut is slightly higher than that if you take imports of pre-charged equipment into account. There are 2 more product bans in the current regulation. One of them is related to the rest of the foam market. There's already a ban on XPS foam if the GWP is above 150, but this is now extending it to all types of insulating foam. And more importantly for this audience, the 2025 ban with a threshold of 750 GWP on single split air conditioning containing less than 3 kilograms. And as we observed again last year, most of this market has already transitioned anyway to either R32 or to blends that contain a lot of R32. So that's sort of business as usual under the current regulation. But the EU review process is now really well underway. The big study done by Öko Research, the German company, assisted by a UK company, Ricardo, were involved in that study. And as probably most of you know, the proposal was published in April, and it is extremely ambitious, which is no surprise given that the EU, the Fit for 55 policies and things like that are very strong in the climate change arena. And what will be happening over the next 12 months will be a lot of lobbying and a lot of discussion in the 3 bits of the European legislative process that will get together in these so-called trilogue negotiations. And the EU Council represents each of the member states. So their environment ministries sit on a committee and discuss things. Obviously, the EU Parliament are the MEPs who will be setting up a subcommittee to review the regulation, and then the European Commission itself. And the proposal is designed for agreement sometime next year, with the regulation starting January 2024. But we should note that's the earliest possible timetable. If things go awry, it could be slower than that. The UK has its own independent process because of Brexit. It's possible the UK will do things differently to the EU, but we need to recognise, A, that harmonisation would be helpful for the industry, and B, that the UK also has very ambitious climate change targets. So we don't know what the UK are going to say yet. Many of you might have been involved in stakeholder groups that they run for the RAC HP sector, and we're expecting a consultation document from DEFRA later this year that will no doubt lay out their ideas more clearly than current. So what have the Commission suggested? The key element of the current regulation is obviously the phase down, measured in tons of CO2 equivalent, and the proposal includes considerably deeper cuts already in the next 3 steps in the years shown here, and new cuts after 2030. So this is really quite severe. Quick review, the existing phase down profile looks like this. We've got a baseline back in 2009 to 2012, which is 100% on this chart. And then we're already at a 55% cut from the beginning of last year. Then the final cut will be a 79% cut in 2030. And as I said a few minutes ago, the next cut is in January 2024, when we jump down here to a 69% cut. The new proposal is considerably more severe. So the yellow line is the old one. We now achieve a 90% cut already by 2027. And then a 95% cut by 2030. You can see a series of very small steps every 3 years after that to get to a 97.5% cut by 2048. That's the proposal. It doesn't mean that it will happen, of course, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion going on across Europe as to whether this is a reasonable profile or not. The key issues, of course, is, first of all, have we got enough gas in, for example, 2027, simply to service the existing stock of equipment? Certainly the modeling that I do would indicate that we will be using up pretty much every scrap of gas just to service the stock of existing equipment. But of course, we also need gas to install new equipment. And an added complication is that a sector that was exempted, which is the medical inhalers, MDIs, metered dose inhalers, they come back into the regulation. I'll come back to that in a minute. In parallel, if this is tough enough as it is, but we've then got the big push across Europe, and certainly in the UK, to decarbonize space heating. And one of the most important tools, and a very exciting tool as far as our industry is concerned, is that we're going to use heat pumps to do that. But we've got to install all those heat pumps, and that will take a lot of new gas going into the equipment. And to amplify that even more, the European Commission published a document a few weeks ago called Repower Europe in response to the Ukraine crisis that suggests pushing the heat pumps out between now and 2030 at an even faster rate than was already under consideration to reduce reliance on gas in countries like Germany. The proposal contains 4 bands that are very important to our industry, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this morning. At a GWP level of 150, all types of so-called self-contained equipment, plug-in room and other self-contained air conditioning and heat pump equipment, and then 2 bans on split air conditioning and heat pumps above and below 12 kilowatts, one with 150 GWP threshold, the other with 750 threshold. Those are both in 2027, as you can see, and the other 2 are already in 2025. A big problem with the proposal is they've used words like self-contained and plug-in and haven't taken the trouble to define them, which is, of course, a worry, and will get resolved, but we don't know how it will be resolved. And it's also not clear in whether transport gets affected, for example, by this self-contained refrigeration ban, because you would probably call a truck refrigeration system would be a self-contained system, potentially. There's some other bans outside of RAC HP. I won't dwell on these now, but happy to answer questions later if necessary. The split air conditioning less than 12 kilowatts is possibly the most the ban of most concern. Before 2018, we were all on 410A. By 2022, almost all of that sub 12 kilowatt market has moved either to R32 or to blends like 454B, for example. Within their report says that took about 4 years. That when I say their report, the Commission's study, and that's their justification for a ban in 2027. Give you guys another 4 years. But in reality, that development took place over a much longer time period, mainly in Japan. And the difference in technology in moving from 410A to 32, it was a subtle design change. Of course, they had to deal with flammability, which was a big issue, but other than that, the design change was small. But in order to go sub 150 from the sort of menu of refrigerants that are currently available to us, we're likely to have to move to something like propane or one of the sub 150 HFO blends like 454C or 455A, potentially to pure HFOs. But all of those are medium or even low medium pressure refrigerants. And so the design changes will be much more significant. And so the key question is all that possible by 2027? And even if it's possible, is it environmentally the best thing to do if the energy efficiency can't be matched? Reading the Commission's report, they seem to think that propane can do the whole job, all the way up to 12 kilowatts. I've already mentioned there's no definitions for self-contained and plug-in. There is a definition in EN 378, which would seem to include, for example, chillers. I'm not sure that the ban was intended to go beyond hermetically sealed systems, but they've used this word self-contained instead. MDIs, just very quickly, they are exempt from the current regulation. There are alternatives becoming available, so the Commission have decided to remove the exemption for MDIs. And there's a fairly complicated quota allocation system that allocates a different sort of quota and phase down rate to the MDI sector. They get a slower profile, like 58% in 2027 compared to 90% for the whole market, including RAC HP. But actually, although the allocations are made in this complicated and separate way, ultimately there's one basket of quota. You know, we might be able to, when I say we, the RAC HP sector might be able to buy gas that was originally allocated from the MDI quota, if we're willing to pay for it, or vice versa. So that introduces a bit of uncertainty. The allocation of quotas is quite interesting. The current methodology is free allocation based on what grandfathering, which means what you used to place on the market before the phase down began. But that whole process, particularly the new entrant mechanism, has led to all sorts of issues. And we've, you know, the growth in the number of quota holders is really unacceptable, quite frankly. So the proposal tries to address that quota holders will need to pay in advance to get their quota. It's not a lot of money, €3 per ton of CO2, but it is hopefully significant enough to eliminate companies that are trying to game the system with picking up free new entrant quota. And there's other mechanisms in place, and they've also put some mechanisms in place to try to address illegal imports of gas, which are particularly in Eastern Europe, I think, are considered to be a major problem, probably less so in the UK, where it's slightly easier to patrol the borders. The existing regulation, of course, has a whole host of other emission prevention measures, and these are being strengthened a bit. The gases affected get extended. There's some mandatory recovery from foam at end of life. And training, and we'll probably talk about this morning, is to include F-gas alternatives and energy efficiency issues. And on the control of use, the thing of relevance is that the service ban, which basically affects 404A equipment in the UK, currently has a threshold of 40 tons of CO2, below which you don't have to comply with the service ban. That threshold is equivalent to 10 kilograms of 404A. The threshold is being removed. That means that things like transport refrigeration units and small condensing units in shops, for example, that use 404A will be affected by this service ban. You can still use reclaimed and recycled refrigerants for those applications till 2030. And there's a ban on an anesthetic in there. The regulation has to address Kigali, which the old regulation didn't. So there's some measures in there on Kigali. So in summary, the Commission proposal is very ambitious. We've got this very fast and deep phase down. We've got some challenging product bans, removal of the MDI exemption, and changes to the quota allocation system. And hopefully that will stir up a bit of debate this morning. And that's it from me, Andrew.
Thanks, Ray. I'll put myself on video. There we go. Thank you very much. Yes. So firstly, just to say to all the people who are already asking, with Ray's permission, we will be sending the slides around, because otherwise people will be frantically taking screenshots. So that's all right. Thank you. So one quick comment to you, and then a couple of very quick clarifications, if we may. So, I mean, I guess with the weight of history, we've been here before, haven't we? So I'm sort of say, should we be overly frightened, or do we trust our lobbyists to work their magic and to get a sort of more sensible?
It's very difficult to judge, Andrew. I mean, what one might expect is that the member states, so the EU Council, will probably try and push back a little on certain measures, but the European Parliament will probably push in the other direction and say, oh, ban it all tomorrow. And so this trilogue discussion needs to reach compromise eventually. I think that it is clear there will be a significant tightening of the regulation. What's important is that the lobbying is sensible. I mean, one example that I've been thinking about in the last week or two is the 12 kilowatt size threshold for that ban that I talked about. What if it was at 6 kilowatts, for example, or 5 kilowatts? Could the very small splits, which is a significant part of the market, of course, single splits at 3.5 kilowatts is a very popular size. Could they use the lower GWP refrigerants safely and efficiently, but push back and say, in that 6 to 12 kilowatt range, they should be treated more like the above 12 kilowatt category? I mean, it makes sense to me, but
Yeah, so it's keep faith in the lobbying is the message. Okay, very quickly, two very quick clarifications. You may have said this already, but it's as the question's been answered, let's get through it. Is the 2025 ban on single splits applicable to new and existing systems?
Only new systems.
Only new. Good, thank you. It's been pointed out, isn't there a derogation for refrigeration minus 70 degrees C?
Yes. It's actually products cooled to less than -50.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's not an evaporating temperature, it's a product temperature. So the evaporating temperatures often might be nearer -70.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then one comment just to head you into the panels. Didn't we use medium pressure in AC before with R22? What's so frightening?
I mean, there's nothing necessarily frightening. It's just a big change. You know, the industry that makes I think I saw a figure, you know, like 80 million small, you know, residential splits a year is geared up to make them with components for refrigerants that are like 410A. So the whole both the compressor supply chain and the heat exchanger manufacturing has got to switch to something very different. It can be done. There's no question it can be done. It's a matter of time, and you know, which gas will emerge as you know, as the right gas. Clearly in Europe at the moment there is very little use of propane in these systems. Well, globally there's very little, but there are definitely some experts that put a fair bit of faith in that as a possibility.
I think we'll get into the propane debate later. I'm pretty confident of that. Okay, Ray, thank you very much for that. And we will see Ray on the panel, so still more chance to ask him questions. But we move seamlessly from one expert to another on F-gas. It's Graham Fox, and he will be unpacking a bit about his latest, I was going to say run-ins with UK government, but I would say discussions with the UK government, and what it means from your point of view, and a few more pointers, I'm thinking. Graham.
Good morning, Andrew. Yep, hopefully. Ray stole some of my thunder, but I'm sure I'll just bring a slightly different perspective to it.
You can never have too much information.
Okay. Well, you say that now. Right, shall I crack on? Thank you, Andrew.
Yep, screen's up, so you're all right. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, thanks, Andrew, and the team, as always, for putting this on, and thanks to Chemours for sponsoring this again. I'm going to try and cover a little bit from the UK perspective to follow on from what Ray covered there. If I can get my computer to actually work, there we go. Okay, so from the UK perspective, DEFRA have consistently stated their intention to mirror as closely as possible whatever they do in the EU. However, the position that's been taken lately by the Commission, which Ray's just laid out for us, is forcing us to look a little bit closer at that direction of travel. We have, of course, left the EU now, and the possibility to divert from the EU position remains possible, even if we don't have a particularly strong appetite to do so. And there's certainly logistical issues with the manufacturers of having different equipment and different rules in the GB and the EU. So it may not be particularly palatable, but similarly, some of the proposals that have come out aren't particularly palatable. So at least we do now actually have that possibility to divert if we want to. So this is the rough timeline that we're looking at proposals due out in July. DEFRA have told us consultation later on towards the end of this year, and the government response due end of Q1 probably next year. Ray had set out the likely regulations to come into force with the EU early 2024, which is what the Commission have told us. DEFRA are looking more at late 2024, probably even early 2025 before the new F-gas regulations come into force. And that's because the UK is essentially waiting to see what the EU does so that we can mirror as closely as possible what they do. Stakeholder group meetings over the last year and a half, I guess, and private discussions that I've had with DEFRA, either representing REFCOM or as part of an ACRIB delegation over the last couple of years, have largely centred on what we can do better, on what is, and perhaps more importantly, what isn't working in the current regulations, and how effective the quota system actually is, and looking at how or have emissions actually been reducing in sufficient quantities. So I've had a couple of meetings with a specialist at DEFRA who was brought in to analyse the data on refrigerant gas use. The first problem that he had was that there wasn't any data, there wasn't until very recently. One of the reasons I set up the RefCom module in the JobLogic software and got them to offer a free license to every one of our members was to encourage as many of the 7,000 plus members that are registered with RefCom to use the software and start logging all of their refrigerant use in the cloud, because that enables us to aggregate data anonymously and provide government with useful and meaningful data which they can form policy based on what actually happens in the real world, rather than just using best guesstimates, which is what policy has largely been formed around today on the whole F-gas agenda since 2002-3, when we first started talking about this. Everything was based on guesswork. It was guesses of how many companies were involved in the sector, how many technicians were working in the sector, how much gas was released to atmosphere, how much gas was used in total. It's all based on guesswork. Now we actually have real data. And what I did with this was I got an entire year's worth of data for every bit of refrigerant used by the members, RefCom members who are actually using the software. And that enabled me to give a data dump to DEFRA, so they can actually see exactly how much refrigerant has been used, how much refrigerant has been recovered for destruction, and how much refrigerant has been recycled. You notice the bottom one. This is just a sample of the top 10 gases used by our members over the last year. And the bottom line there, R404AR, the suffix R signifies that the gas has been recycled. So in this example, we can see that 411 kilograms of recycled R404A has been charged into systems during that 1 year period. So this is really useful data for government, and it goes further than anybody has ever managed before. So we're now all familiar with the phase down steps set out in the last review process, and Ray talked about how it's accelerating. But the steps as they were already quite ambitious. When the last review came out, was published in 2014, the Commission admitted it was ambitious, and I think we've worked very hard as an industry to contend with that. We've changed our work patterns, developed the necessary equipment changes to move away from the high GWP gases and transition, where possible, away from the medium GWP gases as well. The equipment changes, adapting from A1 refrigerants to A2, has been successful, not painless, but successful. As Ray said, it really 4 years time to change for the smaller systems from 410A to R32 largely, so it's been pretty successful. But the prospect of changing to A3 or even A3 refrigerants is a different matter altogether. It demands wholesale production and design changes in the components used in the equipment. And let's not forget that it's not about what's technically feasible, but also very much about what is possible from a practical application perspective. The EU has proposed a rapid acceleration of these steps. Ray covered this. This is actually the table that that DEFRA used in the stakeholder group meeting. I think it sets out really well, because it puts down the current regulation, what the Kigali Amendment says, and what the EU proposal is. And as Ray said, it leaves us at only about 5% of the baseline figure by 2030. Crucially, the new regulations are going to be enforced by 2024 at the earliest. So that's less than 6 years to transition, whereas we had an 11-year transition in the last review from 2014 to 2025 for equipment to transition from A1 to A2L refrigerants. So it's really not given us enough time, as Ray hinted at, I think, for that R&D to really take place, and also to train the technicians to make sure they can safely handle the flammable refrigerants. Important to note also, as Ray said, this 5% also now includes the MDIs, the medical dose inhalers, which account for approximately 25% of that amount. So it actually leaves us not with 5% by 2030, it actually leaves us with only about 3.5% of the baseline. And that's for all of the service work on existing equipment and any sector where the highly flammable gases cannot be used. It is, without doubt, a de facto phase out, not a phase down anymore with this move. As Ray said, the new proposals to ban the use of any gas with a higher higher than 150 GWP in split systems up to 12 kilowatts duty by 1st of January 2027, meaning any split essentially up to 12 kilowatts needs to be using R290 probably. Now that's less than 3 years after this proposal will become law. So where is that period for transition, for the R&D work to take place? The transition for the A2Ls, the R&D story for the A2Ls had been going on for about 8 years in Japan prior to the law enforcing that. So we've essentially missed out about 6 years of R&D on the time frame for actually delivering this. What about getting the technician workforce to be upskilled to work safely with it? There's in the UK circa 35,000 technicians who have had no formal training in handling flammable refrigerant gases. The colleges and the training centres are already under pressure and struggling to deliver numbers. If we now add in the concept that another 35,000 need to have some upskilling or retraining, when is that going to happen? It's not going to happen overnight. So basically, industry's opinion on the proposals are they're impractical, they're unworkable, and they're really based purely on ideology, and no due diligence has been given to the practicalities of it. But important to note, Ray did have this line in as well in his slides, that the wording, except we're required to meet safety standards. So what the Commission is doing here is that they're trying to be very clever by leaving an option open where safety standards don't allow the application of flammable products, so that this ban, this placing on the market ban, would simply be exempt because safety standards don't allow the use of the flammable refrigerants. The problem is, if this accelerated phase down takes place, there will be no refrigerant available to meet those exemptions. There's no point in having an exemption if you can't actually meet that exemption. It's a massive problem as we approach the sharp end of the phase down table, without doubt. So we're now engaging in talks with DEFRA and the Environment Agency about how we can maintain some flexibility in the phase down steps and the GB quota system to allow for the practical use and meet the exemptions going forward. So let's hope some common sense will prevail. And with that, Andrew, I've been brief as I said I would be. Back to you.
Excellent work, Graham. Excellent work. I had lots of trouble with putting my video on and off today. Apologies for that. Yes, I was going to ask you the same question that I asked to Ray about concerns, but I think it came very clearly across. There's a major concern. The question I'm going to ask you, though, is, does this, in your opinion, does this look like it could be a major divergence between the way the UK approaches it, i.e. with sensible lobbying and a sensible approach, and the EU? Could we see quite a distinction, or what's your view?
The thing is, when you talk to ministers or you talk to civil servants, either UK or EU, they all said they don't want to see divergence, and I don't think industry really wants to see divergence either, largely. But there's a very big difference in the way, the rhetoric, the way the civil servants are talking. So when I had meetings just prior to the publication of the EU proposals with the European Commission, and in actual fact, that 1st of January 2027 ban on the up to 12 kilowatts duty in the leaked proposals actually had 1st of January 2025. So that's what we were discussing with the Commission just a couple of days before they actually published their proposals. And I was pointing out that actually they were only giving us about 18 months to do the transition, which was completely unworkable. I actually asked for 2030 as a bit of a compromise, and they pushed it to 2027. Important to note, as Ray said, this is just proposals. This isn't actually set in stone by any means. The lobbying has all got to be done to hopefully push for a bit of common sense. But it's interesting that when I was actually raising this with the Commission, the normal people that we deal with at the Commission were kind of overruled by Frans Timmermans' cabinet office, who had a representative at the meeting with us, and that's the first time it's happened. Normally, when industry meets with the Commission, it's just the actual ozone depleting F-gas team within DG Klima. and the lady from Franz Timmermans' office was clearly not interested at all in what industry had to say or what the concerns of industry was. Her actual words to me were, the Kigali Amendment is bringing in changes with the Article 5 countries. The EU has always led the way on reducing emissions, and we can't allow the Article 5 countries to overtake us. So that seemed to be the biggest focus, was actually about virtue signaling rather than actually bringing something that was sensible. And that was quite concerning to those of us who were on that call. It was a cross-industry delegation that was meeting with the Commission, as I say, a couple of days before the proposals came out. The difference with that rhetoric and the rhetoric that we have when we talk with DEFRA is really quite stark, because actually the DEFRA team get it. They get our concerns. They get the fact that it doesn't matter how much you want something to happen, there are certain things that need to happen to enact or to enable change. And amongst those, doing it safely is actually making sure we have a trained workforce that are actually trained to work safely with flammable refrigerants. We need to give the manufacturers time to develop that equipment to work safely. And let's not forget, it's not just about, I mean, Ray was talking quite rightly about the pressure changes. That's going to have an effect on the heat exchange coils, the compressors, various components within a system, but also every electrical component, every electronic component is going to have to be intrinsically safe. So it's going to be in danger of being exposed to a leak of an A3 refrigerant, for example. So there's massive R&D needs to actually be taking place by the manufacturers to be ready for this. That's not going to happen overnight. And I think the heartening thing is, from a UK point of view, is that DEFRA are actually listening to us, and they seem to be taking that on board. So maybe it's just rhetoric, who knows? But certainly I think that it's heartening to hear the UK government representatives actually listening and responding as we would wish.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, as you've been speaking, the questions have been flooding in, and the prevailing winds split evenly between folk who are saying, what, we've got to all move to flammables, this can't happen, to why aren't we just facing the change that's happening? So we'll get into that in a minute, but let's get the whole of the panel together, and we'll move into the panel discussion. So let me welcome our other panelists. It's Mark Hughes from Chemours, Mark Woods from Arcus FM, and Graham Wright from Daikin, because there's one key element that we need to tease out, I think, and that's the impact on heat pumps. Okay, let's see. Are we all appearing on screen? Mark's just got his holding pattern there. There you are, he's in. Right. Hello to everybody. Right. So let's kick off, as is traditional, with a short few words of introduction from our panelists. I guess I should start with Mark Hughes, as his name is above my head, or his brand name is above my head. We'll go Mark Graham. So Mark Hughes, yes, give us a couple of minutes of reflection.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks again for this opportunity. It seems to come around more quickly every year, and I think the F-gas question time is a great forum to be able to, to get people's views, and I appreciate it. And Chemours will continue to support this moving forward. And thanks very much for your organisation. I'm Mark Hughes. I'm Business Development Manager with Chemours, working in the thermal and specialised solutions business, basically trying to come up with solutions to face up to these sorts of regulations that we're talking about today. So, I'll be talking a little bit more about some of the progress we've made over the last year, since the last F-gas question time, but obviously today we'll talk about specific effects from what seems to be in the regulation basket. But look forward to answering some of your questions. Thank you.
Mark W.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Mark Woods. I'm Chief Operations Officer at Arcus FM. We're a contracting business, and from my perspective, I think we really are facing a bit of a calm before the storm. as we're all trying to return back to normal business after COVID and Brexit in the face of labour demands and material supplies, what are we really going to face into with phase down pinch points, quota allocation reductions, engineering and application upskilling? If we're not careful, I think we could align ourselves to a real perfect storm. So, yeah, I'm really keen to see what we face today.
Everybody's just raising more questions. Who's going to do the answers? Graham, yeah, and over to you, Graham. So I've positioned you as the heat pump guru, but obviously you look across air conditioning as well. So what's this looking like from your perspective?
I've got a few people looking at me for answers, and I'm going to surprise everyone by saying I actually thought that Graham and Ray put a really good set of presentations together, because it is a real issue. It is a perfect storm in many respects. We've got to balance the global warming potential of refrigerants against efficiency. And let's not forget this, all right? So if we've got global warming potential of a leaking refrigerant versus the absolute certainty of CO2 emissions if we make product less efficient, and then we've got to balance that against building safety. So there are issues in there. There's significant issues in there. I did pick up on one of the questions earlier about R22. And one of the reasons we moved from R22 was A, because the refrigerant was causing problems with ozone depletion, etc. But R410A and R32 have enabled us to make the equipment far more efficient. That's taken 15 years. We've got an possibility of throwing that all in the bin at the same time that we've got to provide 600,000 heat pumps a year to the UK market. I think that kind of puts it in some kind of context.
Okay, good. So now we've just we've got lots of people saying it's quite a problem, and I've got lots of people on the line saying, well, what are we going to do about it? So how do we approach that in the debate? Can I just say one more time, for those who clearly have joined us late, please put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. That's how we deal with them all. So again, I'll throw into the pot the open question, which is summarising about 4 different comments and questions. Propane and other hydrocarbons have been under development in various ways for a number of years. Why are we getting so exercised about it? Why don't we just focus on the change that's going to come and move that way? So yeah, that's a nice open question. Graham, why are you so downbeat about it? Graham Fox, that's really how I'm going to summarize it.
I think it's important. Graham Wright hit the nail on the head. It's about energy efficiency for me. We want to make sure we're using the most efficient system, the most efficient refrigerants, and the most efficient systems, because what you have is the absolute certainty of CO2 emissions from the power that we consume to run these systems. That's an absolute given. GWP, the P stands for potential. It only has the potential to have environmental harm. It only actually harms the environment if it's released to atmosphere. We need to get back to that and remember that. It was a very, very big discussion point when the original F-gas regulations were being drawn up. And it seems to have been pushed aside. And people seem to be, or policymakers certainly seem to be taking GWP as some kind of standard of how bad something is. Oh, it's really bad. It's got a GWP of over 150. So what? If it's contained in a system, it has zero impact on the environment. That's a fact. And that's something we really need to remember. So let's get back to concentrating on energy efficiency and using the most energy efficient systems possible. And as far as I know, from the evidence I've seen of COPs of systems with R290 or R32, there's a very big difference in terms of energy efficiency. And that's got a huge impact over the 15-year life cycle of that heat pump.
Okay. Just another observation is that someone is saying it'd be, I quote, naive to think that manufacturers aren't already working on hydrocarbon systems and ready to bring them to market.
That kind of sits with me, I think. I think it'd be naive to think that we're not looking at all kinds of solutions. The fact of the matter is that when manufacturers provide a system to an installer, they have to make sure that the system is being installed properly, or safely and properly. So you're kind of sort of sat there with your hat on looking at what an installer needs to do. Well, actually, at the moment, we don't have very many people trained up on flammable refrigerants, although the industry's been talking about it for a very, very long time. So if there was one clear message for installers, get yourself trained on flammables. The second thing is if things do go wrong on site, it tends to be the manufacturer that's called into question. And, we have to balance what the risks are. I think I said for Fita the other day, it's not a slam dunk that all systems will go to propane. Ray mentioned below 6 kilowatts or below 7 kilowatts. That may well be because the charge levels are reasonably low. You can't imagine systems with 4 or 5 kilograms of a high, should we say an A3 refrigerant being put into buildings that are high rise for whatever reason. So there are some significant challenges, and I don't necessarily think that using hydrocarbons for everything is going to be the way forward. There are some very good refrigerants with the GWP below 150. The downside of it is we've got to figure out how we're going to make them efficiently, and also how we're going to make them, put them in safely.
Thanks. Does anybody else want to add something into that while I'm ploughing through these questions?
I'll chip in a little bit. It worries me intensely that the Commission's study seems to just make the very simplistic assumption that the energy efficiency of propane systems can be equal to the energy efficiency of let's just say other alternatives, that we don't need to specifically say R32. And it's just far too simplistic. At the small end of the size range, and at the moment, that's mainly hermetically sealed, very small systems, hydrocarbons are fantastic. We're using them already in domestic fridges. We're using them very widely in small standalone retail type systems. But you're talking there of, a few hundred grams of gas. And as Graham just said, that the problem comes on if you oversimplify the size issue, and you pretend that 0 to 12 kilowatts is one group. It isn't one group. There's nobody making propane systems anywhere in the world above about 4 or 5 kilowatts. Certainly not to my knowledge. And I'm talking about split air conditioning units here. And the number that are being made are absolutely minuscule. There is a great reluctance, even globally, in the uptake. I saw a figure recently of something like 50,000 have been manufactured last year. Now that sounds a big number, but there's 85 million residential splits have been manufactured last year. So 50,000 is a fraction of 1%. So one's got to ask the question, why? And I think Graham hit the nail on the head. It's about time for R&D. There's no question that we need to get there. But to get there by 2027 is just unbelievably it will lead to either wrong solutions with the wrong energy efficiency or accidents. And we saw what happened after Grenfell. When you get those bad accidents happen when a lot of very unlikely things all happen one after the other, or all at the same time. We need to be mindful of that, but we have to get there, and I think that to think that by, let's say, the early 2030s, that we would still be using the I'll call them the medium GWP gases like R32, is probably, well, it's got to be wrong. We've got to make a transition. We've got to have enough time to do it. And I saw Claire Perry made a statement in, I think it was in the chat, I'm not sure. Claire, I think, British technology, we do want to push push ahead. We're not a fear-mongering industry, but we are a cautious industry, or at least a realistic one. And the time offered to move an industry, for example, to propane seems wrong.
I think it's important as well to remember the question was about one of the questions was about it would be naive to think the manufacturers haven't been doing R&D on this. I completely accept that. Yes, let's go back a little bit to when fridges and freezers had to go below 150. So yeah, it's fine. We've all got fridges and freezers now that probably run with isobutane. I remember 10, 15 years ago when they were first coming in, there were fridge doors blowing off because there were leaks inside fridge cabinets, and the R&D hadn't been done properly, so they weren't using sealed thermostats in the fridges or in the fridge cabinets. Now, we don't hear about fridge doors blowing off now because the manufacturers have done their R&D properly and they've had that time to develop the systems to actually build those fridges and freezers more safely. But we had accidents, and let's not forget, we had accidents with systems that had about 60 grams of isobutane in them. We're now talking about having split systems with 2 or 3 kilograms or more of hydrocarbons in it. That is just a risk I don't want to take. Not until the industry's ready for it. Just to put a bit of perspective on it. Sorry,
it's also a bit further than the manufacturers doing R&D. It's about the engineering, upskilling in the application as well. Because the big businesses, the big contractors, those that are associated with trade associations will be knowledgeable. We have a huge tail in this industry that still hasn't caught up from the last regulation changes. Yeah. We will see 12 kilowatt systems being put in 2 meter square rooms. We absolutely will, and that's a training that's going to take years to catch up.
And as the law stands at the moment, it'll be untrained people putting them in because there is no legal requirement for them to have any training whatsoever to install a hydrocarbon system because they don't come under the F-gas scope at all.
So that moves me neatly onto a couple of questions around the training issue. One is, when are we going to bring trainings in flammables specifically and the alternatives into F-gas type training? Will that happen as an overall F-gas type course?
Well, as ACRIB, we did make that deposition to DEFRA, what, 2 years ago, Graham? So we formed our position and we went to DEFRA with it. We also went as ARIA and EPE to the European Commission with the same proposals. And as we've now seen, the EU didn't actually take those proposals on. But DEFRA, as I said earlier, seem to be a bit more pragmatic about it, and they do seem to be encouraging the concept of including alternative refrigerants in the training requirements. That would require mandatory retraining or upskilling.
And I will repeat my statement earlier. If you're working with refrigerants, working in the air conditioning or refrigeration industry, get yourself trained on flammable gases, because that's one of the ways that we'll be able to make the transition. It's not the only way, but it's very, very important. And it's important because it's not people like you and I that will be affected. It's a service engineer who does something slightly wrong because he doesn't know what he's doing. And that's the bit that really worries me.
Yeah. An interesting point, sorry, Graham, just to say an interesting point just to throw in is, or Graham's in fact, someone's made, is that will the building safety bill in the UK have any bearing on use of flammables? It's an interesting extra element to throw in, isn't it?
I think it has to. Ray mentioned Grenfell, yes, and that was a series of unexpected situations that occurred that created a major fire. But we have to listen to that. And when you listen to some of the podcasts that came out of Grenfell, it's frightening. And the problem is that we, as an industry, we've been doing things that not necessarily been the right thing to do at the right time. So we definitely will have to change what we do. There are things that are moving on about skills within government, and quite clearly, both Graham Fox and I are included in that, and we want to make sure that everyone is as safe as possible, not just when it's put in, but throughout the operational life of a system. Because we all think about the contract handover as being, well, we're done now, but actually it's not. It's when that system's been in for 20 years, and it's coming to the end of its life, and perhaps it's not working the way that it should do, that you end up with the biggest risks. Now, I don't care what refrigerant it is, that becomes an issue for us to be able to manage. And we've all lost sight of that for many years, and it's something we need to have a very clear view on.
Can I come back to heat pumps, because I'm getting a lot of questions about heat pumps, and partly because we're chatting about it on the other side, on the hot side as well. That whole ban issue, or the under 150, is going to hit the heat pump sector, isn't it, as well as what we recognise as the AC sector. So is there a view from the shall we call it the heat pump sector, Graham, right?
I think everyone's trying to get over the I say get over it. It's understanding what we need to do with heat pumps, and then sticking this decision about whether we use a different refrigerant and how we use it in the middle of it complicates things quite considerably. It's very clear that we've got a bit of time. So for the next 2 to 3 years, perhaps even 5 years, it's going to be a transition period to whatever gas we use. Now, I've been on the record in saying that manufacturers will choose what they think they can use safely. And that will then, and also efficiently. So as far as R290, it could well be used, and it's a good refrigerant. Are you going to put R290, or should we say a couple of kilos R290 outside someone's semi-detached house? Well, if you use it safely, put it in safely, I can't see why not. But a manufacturer will make their choice about what they want to do, and if they can get something at sub 150. Well, they may well do that, and it's a 2L. That will be fine. I know Ray just wants to say something. I see he's put his hand up.
He's waving his hand, doing the correct thing, Ray.
Yeah, no. I mean, I totally support what Graham has just said, and I just wanted to emphasise the fact that the environment, from a climate change perspective, one of the most important things that Europe has to achieve in the next few years is to stop using natural gas, and even worse, oil or direct electricity for heating. And that the environmental benefits of switching to a heat pump are massive, particularly as the electricity grid is rapidly decarbonising. So it's a no-brainer that we need the heat pumps. I firmly believe that the so-called monoblock outdoor air-to-water heat pump will probably move to propane. That's a good application for propane. The efficiency will be good, and as Graham said, you can build it safely, and if it leaks, you're outdoors. There isn't a great worry. The problem is on split heat pumps, and many buildings need split heat pumps. We need to do domestic water heating as well as space heating, for example. But many buildings are just more complicated than would allow a simple monoblock to be located outdoors. What about apartment blocks? What are we going to do with many people that live in apartment blocks? I used to live in a flat some years back, and I had my own independent gas-fired space heating system in my flat. I was on the 3rd floor. Where am I going to put a heat pump? First of all, that's a problem. But likelihood is it would be split. If we're too quick with the change, we're going to slow the rollout of heat pumps, and we're just shooting ourselves in the foot environmentally. Yeah.
You'll actually end up introducing the wrong solutions longer term.
Yeah, sorry, if I could just add my little piece on this, and that is, and I think the guys have already said it really, and that is, it's to leave enough space for a range of solutions for a given application, and not lock it down so much that effectively you just squeeze the timelines, and it's such an important thing, heat pumps going in there. And yeah, we know that propane is a great refrigerant and it will work on the monoblocks, but I say it doesn't cover all the bases. And if you take a one size fits all, you know what happens. You get a very ill-fitting suit sometimes, and that's the problem that we might have. We might have a solution that doesn't fit correctly, and will increase the rollout time for what is a very, very important technology. So I just wanted to put my piece in for that.
And
you,
if
Mark.
I could make a final, I presume that you need to wind this up very quickly, Andrew.
I'm
But
giving you 5 more minutes because this is, in some ways, this is the bit that people are getting into. So keep rolling.
The end of life issue is interesting because Graham made the point about global warming potential, and if only the gas stays in the system, it doesn't do any harm at all, which I totally agree with. The problem from a policymaker point of view is that every kilogram of gas that's manufactured will eventually end up in the atmosphere, is the fear. So the way in which we handle gas at end of life becomes really, really important. And I think the Commission actually missed a trick in that they were very weak on the reporting requirements, even though industry said, I'm sure, to the Commission, we like the sort of mandatory electronic reporting that is going on, for example, in Poland. Everybody's got a smart, and what Graham illustrated, I think, was a software package that technicians can use from their smartphone. Is that correct, Graham?
Yep.
And every time that what is currently, I think, in Article 6 of the regulation, that end users need to keep records of everything they do, including what they do at end of life, and it should be entered into a system. At the moment, the system can be a piece of paper tucked away in a drawer. Nobody accesses that data. And my instinct is that the end of life position is not that good, that I don't see enough gas being recovered and reclaimed as my modeling suggests is becoming available at end of life. So that would imply that people are cutting the corner and not attaching a recovery machine and doing what, I mean, it's mandatory. It's been mandatory since 2006 to recover the gas, but I'm not sure that the smaller contractors are all doing it. And so a stronger regulation at end of life would then make Graham's point absolutely right, that it doesn't need to leak, but at end of life, we need to make sure we collect it and either at that point destroy it or reuse it.
Yeah. Can I just, the real issue with end of life isn't our sector. The real issue with end of life, because the larger systems tend to be decommissioned by professional engineers to do actually properly recover the refrigerant. The lost refrigerant we have at end of life comes from the split systems where there's zero policing by the local environment agency officers or whoever it is that's meant to be actually doing the on-the-ground policing. And we frequently get reports at REFCOM from our members complaining they've gone to site to recover refrigerant. And I did this myself when I was an on-the-tools engineer. We'd get a contract to go to a shop, for example, and degas 3 air conditioning units so that the builders could strip them out for a refit of a shop. And by the time we got to site, there was no gas in them because the builder thought, oh, these pipes are in the way, take a hacksaw to it, cut through. Now, the problem is when I get these reports to me, I say, well, you need to give me details. You need to give me names and addresses. Who did it? When did you know there was gas in it? Because the Environment Agency need evidence to be able to prosecute. And there's a real reluctance among people to actually be whistleblowers and have their name down on record as any kind of witness in a legal case, because they just don't want to get tied up in something like that. And often the builders were threatening them with all kinds of stuff if they were to actually whistleblow. So that is a problem. That's not something we're going to actually iron out through F-gas regulations, because all the F-gas regulations does, it affects our sector. It doesn't affect the builders at all. And that is a big, big issue with end of life. And if we could sort that out with better policing with local authorities, then a lot of these end of life concerns would actually disappear.
I think as we draw this section to a close, I want to just remind everybody that F-gas question time was set up really to try and unpack the practical implications of the regulation. And I don't want the audience to think that it's just all about policy. We've also got to be thinking about how this affects the people on the ground. So Mark Woods, I was going to sort of let you do the penultimate piece, which is just to say, well, you know, on the ground, what does this look like apart from a little bit scary? I mean, skills is one thing, regulations is another, but you've got to have the people on the ground. I think one of the things that I often think about when we see various proposals and then somebody says, well, why can't the industry do that? Is just to remember that we're actually quite a small industry in the scheme of things. You know, there are not that many people on the ground. And so all the changes have big implications. But yeah, what does it look like what does it feel like at the moment from a contractor's point of view?
So like I think I said, it's a bit of a calm before the storm, actually. We're just getting back to BAU after where we are. Material supplies are challenging, refrigerant isn't. So I don't think that's on the back of people's minds. We will prepare and we will do the training if we have to. Absolutely, we will. But we need some time. We need the trainers, we need the educators to be there, because God knows they're struggling to deliver MVQ 2s and 3s at the moment, let alone the additional training. I think our biggest fear is actually the heat pump sector itself is probably the biggest sector that needs the most training. And actually, that's a lot of people to come into that. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. All our engineering teams faced frontline through COVID. A lot of them actually reevaluating how they want to work now and what they actually want to do with their careers. Additional training, a lot more upskilling, and then the practical application is going to be difficult as well. The big businesses will do it without any hesitation. The ones that, you know, members of FEET, Bidra and all the others, they will absolutely deliver it. It's that big tail in the industry that won't. And we'll be talking in 20 years' time of incidents and accidents that have happened where people are just not known.
Excellent, thanks. Right, I'm going to give everybody else one sentence, which is, I know, a massive challenge. Mark Hughes, you don't get one because you're coming back in a minute. So let's start with Graham Wright.
One sentence.
Or two at max.
Okay, look, 2 messages. Get trained. That's the 3rd time I've said it if you're an installer. And consultants, please don't just go run around trying to specify the lowest GWP refrigerant, because you end up costing your customers or your clients a lot more money. Take a balanced view to it.
Thank you. Should we do Graham Fox next?
Yeah, my message to the members is always get that training done. Don't wait until it's a law. Just get that upskilling done, because it's coming. And the sooner you get it done, the sooner we remove the barriers to transition. The change is coming. It's just a matter of timing. So yeah, training. See a pattern here, Graham. Yeah.
You say something that doesn't use training, Ray.
But I won't use training, but I will sort of pick up the theme. You know, the change will happen. It's about timing, and you know, in 2035 we need to be in a completely different place to where we are now. The key question is, can we be there by 2027 without creating other harms? You know, and what we need is some other options up our sleeve, and those will take some time to develop, I guess.
Thank you. We'll just say there's a lot of questions coming in. We'll try and keep addressing them as they happen. But there's a lot to talk about, as you can see, and we want to keep the dialogue going. So thank you to all the folk that are on the screen in front of me. We'll move seamlessly on to Mr. Hughes, who will later be joined by an end user. And they will give a presentation. Then we'll have the second panel. So plenty of time still to get your questions in. Try and keep them simple, though. I'm seeing a lot of 6-sentence questions coming in. Thank you. Over to you, Mark. I can't hear anything, Mark. Are you on mute?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, there's a bit of a delay, I think, with the Zoom at the moment. So
okay.
You are now in sound and vision, so please start.
Okay. So I'm just going to very briefly go through some things which actually cover points that we've already made earlier on about heat pumps and training and stuff like that. But you can see the background there. Actually, for those who don't know, those are shallots. We're one of the largest producers in this country of shallots in Europe. And there you are. And I'll tell you where they fit in a little while. So moving on. So the first thing we talked about was about training, getting information out there to contractors. And what's happened really since we talked last year is one of the things that you see in red there is that an alliance has been formed between a number of equipment manufacturers, distributors, and Chemours ourselves are involved in that. And it's really to move the good work that's been done by trade associations into the commercial environment. And part of that, in the auspices of core concerns, is to provide training, guidance, and whatever for real applications in the marketplace for A2L refrigerants, which are one of the options that we can use going forward. I'm very grateful now to have David Sowden from ex of Emerson, who's now joined Chemours to help provide some of that support into the marketplace with our Option XL refrigerants in those A2L refrigerants. We talked a lot about these today. I won't spend a lot of time on this. We've got that big move to splits in 32. It shows it can be done going to low GWP, and we can go even further down with 454B in the larger chillers that we see out there. Heat pumps, we talked a lot about heat pumps. And we've got people like ASDA, for instance, going in, and Brian will talk about this in a little while, moving to 454B, instead of heat pumps, instead of using gas boilers in their estate, with projects going forward on that. And the other thing is that we also have, on the low to medium pressure refrigerants like 454C, they tick the less than 150 box, and actually also have exceptional efficiency. But the key is you have to redesign the equipment. You can't just stick it in an old 410A unit and expect it to perform. This is completely new engineering, but it's being done, and we're starting to see the benefits of that in the marketplace. Widespread adoption of A2L, both in retail and non-retail. Our big, shall we say, win, if you like, in the last year has been cold store activity. Big cold stores out there previously would have been installed on 449 or 452. But as we see, what's on the writing on the wall, we need to be going to low and low GWP. And we've got A2L products out there now, and we're supporting some of our distributors and some of the contractors out there to move where they don't want to use ammonia or CO2, and there's reasons to use those in some cases, but not everywhere. This is where the shallots come in. This is a project we did with Wellvent, with one of the largest growers of shallots in this country. You can see all the details there using the 454A product in this case in a secondary system, and that's something that we published quite recently. So that's the most up-to-date case study. We talked a lot about Central England Co-op. They continue to run. One thing to perhaps just point out here is that we need a specific solution for the cold rooms that are within those convenience stores. And TV Master, you'll hear from later, have been involved in providing some innovative solutions with A2L for those activities. And then on to ASDA. 454A is now the main model for all ASDA projects. There's a lot of equipment being put in out there, and the recent project was to convert an old CO2 store to XL40 454A. And I'll let Brian talk to this in a moment. This significant improvement in energy consumption when moving from CO2 at the store in Bootle to 454A. 454A, you can see there the graph of before and after, which is a great improvement that was seen on that specific project. So that's my last slide there. And as I say, we've got long-term sustainable solutions there. Even with the sort of F-gas things that are being presented, we can still fit some of our products into those for the future. I think we have to just see what happens with the EU and then the GB F-gas proposals themselves. But obviously, we'll work with whatever comes up. So I'm going to stop sharing now and back to you, Andrew, to bring in Brian.
I have to come back in to bring in Brian.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Let me bring in Brian then. I thought you could hand over on your own, but
Brian's there.
Can I welcome Brian Churchard to carry
everybody.
on?
Yeah, thanks everybody. So I'm responsible for engineering, design standards, net zero strategy, and energy reduction within ASDA. So everything that the panel have already discussed and everything Mark has just been through is really a reiteration of what I would argue we've deployed in practice. Graham had made the point of the focus around 1 GWP or ultra low GWP is really not been our USB on all of the activity and assessments we've done over the years. We've spent what probably could equate to a small fortune in trialing and assessing many different types of alternative refrigeration systems to HFC gases. What became apparent through those assessments is that when we looked at a system that was well contained, well maintained, well designed, that the actual performance of the older systems were pretty good. So this made the transition to what were the alternatives quite difficult for us, but we understood the impacts, we understood the energy performance impacts of those systems, so on and so forth. But then it became apparent that we needed to go again, hence the development of the A2L design standard, of which is now in full deployment. What's interesting with the A2L design standard is that every time we touch a store, regardless of what equipment we're replacing, there is an element of low carbon refrigeration going into those stores. Seldom do we replace everything in the store in one go. If we had to do that, it would be very small number of stores we would influence year on year. This way we can get there quicker. The graph that Mark had just shown was for our sustainability store in Bootle built in 2008. We already knew that the impacts of energy consumption were significant using that system. But at the time of 2008, it was the GWP was the focus. However, when we move through time and through the developments of A2L, we can clearly see that there's a significant energy saving to be had by moving to these refrigerants that are with the right design standards safe and also huge energy performance benefits. It seems a little odd in this conversation that we seem to almost be fighting for probably the single most important thing, and making it first and front of our thoughts is safety of systems and also energy. That it seems a little odd that we're thinking of these two things as almost secondary to the GWP, which seems to continue to be the focus of the conversation. We are absolutely clear that our stores are safe places to shop. We have both a moral and legal responsibility to ensure that our customers coming into our stores are shopping in a safe environment. And this has really got to be part of this is very much the focus of our assessments. When we do look at GWP, we are also achieving some great direct savings opportunities, a 94% reduction in direct emissions. In GWP reduction of the refrigerant of choice, but that's against the backdrop of a 50% reduction in energy saving of those refrigeration systems over a period of time. We also look at our reduction prevention transition strategy that I've spoken about many times in these calls, a 64% direct emissions reduction through that period. So all of this is really done with value in mind, with the environment in mind, and first and foremost with safety in mind in everything that we're doing. And Mark has just mentioned the refrigerant we're using there. That will change. Time will go by, and then new products and new opportunities will show themselves. We have to remain technically neutral, technically agnostic. We've used these words many times before, because as we move through time, there will be new opportunities that will show themselves. So safety, energy consumption within the framework of the F-gas regulation, that F-gas regulation changes and alters through time, then we will change and alter through that. But safety and energy consumption will remain the priority as we move through this. Back to you, Andrew.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brian and Mark. Right, you will now move over to the panel area, where you'll be joined by another 3 experts from the supply chain. So can I welcome Colin Green of Ryan Jayberg, Chris Chisman of TV, and Peter Woods of Wolseley to come on screen in their own time. We've just got to find them. While we're on there, shall we grasp the nettle while we can then, Brian? Use of R410A has caused a little bit of press, I noticed recently.
Yes.
And I know you want to set the record straight.
Yes, there was a release that's come out yesterday from the International EIA talking about our rollout of 410A heat pumps across the entire estate. The context of that submission was based on a bit of marketing material of a new supplier that we've engaged more recently, and goes back 2 years when we were trialing their equipment. And it was nothing more than 4 sites trialing their equipment, as we've done with a number of other suppliers. But the context of the trial and the conversation was helping them understand what our requirements of the future were going to be around net zero 2040. So yes, heat pumps are absolutely going to be part of our net zero solution moving forward, but that is against the backdrop of the need to replace gas-fired systems. And before we push the button and just go into wholesale swap out of those gas-fired systems, we need to be sure that we are replacing them with the appropriate equipment, and we have the appropriate suppliers in place to do that. So the context of the EIA reports and whatever it is their view is of our position is out of context. It is about heat pumps, but it's about energy efficiency, and it's about the safe use of those systems in exactly the same way it is for refrigeration.
Thanks, Brian. Now we have been joined by the other panelists. So again, here they all are. Now let me welcome them by getting them to introduce who they are and where they're coming from. We'll start with Chris then.
Hello, yeah, my name's Chris Chisman. I'm Technical Director at TUV Limited. We're a manufacturer of condensing units, cellar coolers and cold room equipment. Obviously the ones that were mentioned that are involved at ASDA and at Central England Co-op. Also award-winning at the RAC Refrigeration Product of the Year back in 2020, which is great. And in terms of what's on my mind is really 2024 and 2027 and the phase down, even without the the potential of it increasing, what the effect that will be in terms of refrigerant price and in terms of the early stages of the phase down previously, there was a double-digit increase in refrigerants. If that happens again, I might be scaremongering, but does that mean £1,000 a kilogram or something like that in terms of refrigerant? So and remember previously, and it's been spoken about in the early parts of the earlier panel, the changes that happened before are a lot easier in terms of going to 448, 449 and R32 to 410A. So, this time it's going to be a lot more difficult. So I'm worried about the black market. I'm worried about service costs crippling, the smaller end users. And really we need these new, the new equipment going online sooner rather than later, because the product life of the current old HFC equipment is really, potentially quite short now.
Thanks, Chris. Colin, welcome.
Thank you. Hello there, everybody. Thanks to the previous speakers. It's been very informative up till now. As I'm the managing director of Ryan Jayberg Limited. I'm currently celebrating my 40th year in refrigeration. Through that time, I've seen a lot of changes. I've obviously seen the CFC phase out and change over to the HFC refrigerants. in comparison to what we're facing at the moment, I think that was a fairly simplistic change out. We changed from one manufactured gas to another. We all thought that was the solution. We jumped in with full gusto, and then shortly found out that you know, the sort of ozone was now not an issue, but greenhouse gases were. So I think it's been touched on earlier on today that you know, we must get the right solution. It's far too easy to jump in and find out in a few years' time that we've now got another problem on our hands. And I think you know, we are in a situation whereby there is no obvious solution, one size fits all. I liked Mark's analogy about the soup. Not heard that one before. I thought that was very good, Mark. And I think, you know, we find ourselves with a situation whereby there are many different solutions for different applications. We in our business see sort of the whole spectrum of refrigeration, from design side through to installation and service. We also have a division that obviously is specializing in specialist display case equipment. So we see the whole sort of portfolio of cabinet solutions, as well as contracting retail refrigeration solutions. And I think, you know, we very much see it as there are four solutions now. You have your small systems that are likely to sort of go down the propane route. You've got the sort of slightly larger commercial, medium to small commercials that are likely to end up going down the route of the A2Ls, and I think that's the area that is going to be of biggest expansion and development going forward. Moving on from that, we've seen a lot of the larger HFC solutions going over to CO2, and I think, you know, that's been pioneered over the last 10 years, and is a solution. We're also seeing that sort of move and slightly encroach onto the ammonia, larger sort of food production side as well. And then obviously ammonia still stays there as the sort of the ultimate industrial solution. So I think, you know, there are many different facets to the challenges that face us. Training has been brought up, particularly keen on that. We've been pioneering through our display case division hydrocarbons for the last 10 years. So you know, I think that it's not an easy puzzle, but as everybody has said, you know, we must make some inroads, and I think, you know, the higher we set the bar and challenge ourselves, the better.
Thanks, Colin. So Peter, you have a slightly different perspective to the rest, being the wholesaler in the proceedings, but also designing kit yourselves. So yeah, what's your perspective?
Hi, Andrew. Slightly different from everybody else's, because I'm not as focused on A3s or air conditioning. Now, I particularly am involved with heavy refrigeration or heavy commercial. Now, we're seeing a lot more transition now towards A2Ls on the industrial side. People are thinking, well, what is a sustainable alternative? Energy hasn't come into it as greatly as the supermarkets. We've got more concern from contractors and end users about the sustainability of the refrigerant. How am I going to get this refrigerant into my systems? What do I need to do to change over to this refrigerant? Are there safety implications? Are there supply chain issues with this equipment? Now, the good news is that we've got a lot of equipment available to us now, and I see it as my role. I'm the technical sales director of Wolseley Climate, and I see it as my role to encourage people to transition towards these refrigerants. We have a lot of product now available to us that we didn't have 2 years ago, and this product is mainly scroll semi-hermetic for my side of the industry, and we can build packs, we can build condensing units. We have to do our due diligence, obviously, so it does take time to develop products. I'd agree with that, but we're designing bespoke products. We're not designing mass production products. So we're a little fortunate in that we can concentrate on one specific project at a time, and we don't have to roll it out into mass production. We've looked at the regulations. Obviously, we've got EN 378. We've looked at DESIR, and we've worked with our contractors. And I'm working on 3 particular projects at the moment regarding R454A with SK Heating and Cooling. We've got a very large project that we've split into small chunks to enable us to use R454A. So instead of doing central package plant, we've gone with single condensing units of 25 and 33 horsepower using the Copeland next generation compressors. And we've been able to reduce charge sizes by bringing the pipework lengths down and close coupling as best as we can to ensure that we've got levels of refrigerant in the systems which are well below the maximum criteria for the LFL in the room volume. And we see over the next 5 years that everybody in the small to medium-sized contractor base will need to upskill, will need to adopt these new refrigerants. And how we go about that is by giving encouragement and giving support as a wholesaler. Training is very important, and I would agree with everybody that has put an emphasis on training. We need to get the training down to the grassroots level to ensure that we install this equipment safely.
Thanks, Peter. It's clear, looking at the questions coming in, that safety is a key area. You've all mentioned that in one way or another today. Safety and training. Perhaps Brian can answer this one. Actually, there's a couple of people saying, "Well, you know, where does what we do as end users and contractors fall in line with the likes of the health and safety executive or the safety overview?" Because obviously we can't just rush into new refrigerants without making the safe measures, the safety measures, mitigation measures. And I know that when you put your A2Ls in, I think the phrase you used was over-engineered the safety, but you had some quite interesting learnings from that whole aspect.
Yeah,
flammability, etc.
I mean, incredibly, Mark reminded me the other day that this has pretty much nearly been 4 years of development, which is quite tremendous. But we always said at the beginning that the design standard we would create would effectively be a belts and braces approach in the absence of anything specifically around an A2L design standard. So effectively working towards more of an A3 design standard. The engineers then that went along that journey with us, and it has to be said that the guys at City, is no secret in the fact that City supports us across design, installation, service and maintenance, are the key reason why we've been able to land this technology, are the key reason as to why we're seeing 30 to 40% energy savings, because they are positioning themselves from a training perspective in just exactly the sweet spot they need to be. They are prepared, they are ready, they understand what our requirements are, they understand the direction we're heading in, and they put themselves in that position where they can support us. And because they've had the appropriate training, because they're on that journey, because they focus on things like refrigerant leakage reduction and all these different types of things, it really puts us in a strong position, and we can proudly say that we have a team of professional engineers from design, install and service and maintenance working in our estate.
I think one of the things to throw into the conversation as well, again, has come up a lot with reference to GWP, also reference to the industry going back, is containment and leakage. I think Mark Woods made the point, or somebody made the point that it doesn't leak, you know, as Graham Fox, that GWP, you know, that's just the potential, and it's about containment. And then, of course, on the lines, we've had people coming back saying, well, why doesn't the industry do more about containment? So I guess I'd be interested in what your response to that is, because it's come from a place where containment was very poor 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Colin, your folk have been heavily involved with some big end users, haven't you, over containment over the years and leakage and things?
Yes, very, very much so. And I think it is a fair point. I think that the work that's been done certainly by some of the big end users in terms of driving that education and just general day-to-day sort of I suppose work practices of leak checking and doing the basics of anticipating where leaks are going to come up has borne some great sort of fruit. I think we've also participated with a few of our clients in terms of sort of monthly F-gas review meetings to drive that education forward. And I think more of that is necessary throughout the whole industry. Again, I think it comes back to something that Mark was saying earlier on, the bigger players, shall we say, with the professional attitudes towards F-gas and training as a whole will get there. I think the concern for the industry is that sort of I'm only a small one-man band, nobody's looking at me, I can get away with things that others can't. So I think we as a major player can play our part, and I have to say we're very proud of the figures that our service guys are now producing. They are way in excess of where we ever envisaged we would be, perhaps even 5-6 years ago. We set some ambitious targets with our clients, and we surpassed them and continue to do that. And again, that is just purely the fact that the guys are out there now with that mentality of saying, if I see something, I don't walk away from it, I deal with it, or I report it in and it gets dealt with. So it's it doesn't come without a lot of effort. We've put a lot of effort and money in behind it, but it has borne fruit for us as a contractor who in the majority of cases pays for that refrigerant under comprehensive contracts. So it's in our interest not to leak refrigerant, and it's in the interest of our client for that as well. And overall, obviously, it's got to be the right thing to be done. So I think it is possible. I think there's always more to be done, but I think the message down the line, and Mark would say spoke about this sort of long tail. I think that's where we need to put the emphasis on now in terms of stopping those leaks. It can be done. We've proved it can be done, and I think we as the, if you like, the big boys need to show the other rest of the industry how we can achieve it.
Thanks, Colin. Brian, I know you'll have views about containment.
Yeah, it's been the single biggest focus in 2007 when I joined the business, and it still is to this very day. It not only is it environmentally damaged, it's a huge cost to the business. Pound notes floating into the atmosphere. No one would want to see that. I think there's a little bit of an irony here where we're talking a lot of conversation about the use of propane as a refrigerant, and its low GWP, and obviously the fact that it has a high flammability is, and I hope I kind of explain this properly, is that the last thing you want to leak is propane. So a 10 GWP of whatever it is, if its focus is around leakage of that refrigerant, has a reduced environmental impact. If it has the potential to leak, it kind of starts working in opposition to itself. You don't want these ultra low GWP refrigerants to leak, CO2, ammonia, propane, yet they seem to be chosen for the fact that if they leak, they don't have as much of an environmental impact. So therefore leakage becomes containment becomes one of a safety issue, less an environmental issue, which is also concerning as to why would you then not include those refrigerants under the F-gas regulation in terms of recording the leakage and the safe use of those gases.
Thanks, Brian. I was brought to mind of an interesting application featuring HFO's petrol station that we featured last month. Mark, that's a good example of good mitigation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that they're completely separate. It's completely separate areas. A petrol station, forecourt, we've used the HFO-based A2L refrigerants in the XL Option XL as we call them, in a German petrol station. It's the first of its kind, and actually there's a lot of exploratory work going on with forecourt cooling in general. But the point is that it's entirely safe. I mean, just because it's a petrol station doesn't mean that you're going to have, a resistance against using a mildly flammable refrigerant in there, because you can't get an ignition event whatever you go for, whether there's a petrol station there or it's somebody getting a bottle of beer out of the chiller. So it doesn't really matter what the environment is. It just happens it probably makes a bit more, people make a bit more fuss because it is a petrol station. But actually the concept is that you don't use these products unless you can use them safely. I think we've done a lot of work on the A2Ls to get to that stage where you can use them with care, with following the right methodologies. That's all, clearly stated now. It's not easy, but once you know it, there's contractors out there that basically, it's a no-brainer for them. I think the key comes that when you start to look at products that have higher hazard positions, we've dealt with ammonia for many years. There's specialist contractors that deal with that. But if you do, looking at propane, going to higher and higher charge sizes in general use, and I think that's the key part of it, particularly in refrigeration, we're going to need high skill levels of contractors to ensure that we mitigate the risks that are involved there. And I think that's the difference that we're seeing there. We want the transition to go quickly. The easier that transition, the quicker it will go. The safer a product is to use, the quicker it will be moved. Unfortunately, we don't have many A1 refrigerants with low GWP left. We've got CO2, but obviously we've rehearsed arguments like that. It's not applicable in every case, as Colin commented on earlier as well. Okay.
Thank you. There's an interesting question coming in from Paul Huggins at the Carbon Trust, which is thanks for the discussion, and it's interesting to see how GWP and energy efficiency are the moves towards reducing those are progressing on in refrigeration. But what can we do to accelerate the moves towards lower carbon in refrigeration? Who's got a view on that? I bet Brian's got a view on that.
The more financially sustainable the technology is, the more ecologically sustainable and the quicker we can get there. And what I mean by financially sustainable, there's the first cost issue is how much we have to pay for equipment. But when you start layering into that the longer term benefits around energy savings built into a longer term business case, and we also got to remember the reliability of systems. So supermarkets are looking for 100% uptime of their systems throughout the year. Ultimately, that's the aim, and I'm pleased to say we're pretty much nearly there from an ASDA perspective. So the technology needs to add value to any organization. It needs to be seen to be a cost-effective, efficient, low maintenance costs. All those things need to layer into it, because we can't get away from the fact that we live in an economically driven world. So the more, if we want to get there quicker from an ecological sustainability perspective, it needs to be financially sustainable as well, across the board, from first cost all the way through to life cycle cost. And you need to understand those impacts from day one. We've done an analysis right up to 2040, so we understand the cost impacts of one technology versus another. We understand the emissions impacts of one technology to another, and you need, once you understand that, you understand where the value of the investment in. The last thing I'd say is also understand the cost of carbon taxation in the future, because you can start layering that into your business case as well, as you start mitigating these carbon costs.
Mark's waving his hand desperately to get a question, to get an answer.
Just very, very quickly. I think one of the focuses that we've got, with the recent hikes in energy cost, electricity, everybody feels that, and the retailers feel it, and the number of the operators of cold stores do as well. Well, all of them do, because everything runs on electricity basically. I mean, the Cold Chain Federation, you know, it's a major focus because it's such a part of the expenditure that these cold store operators have, that now I think they're questioning, you know, absolutely, what does it cost me per kilowatt of cooling to actually run this piece of equipment? And that, you know, when you start getting into that, GWP steps out of that, because once you get to below about 300 GWP and you've got reasonable, you know, you've got good containment, it's another thing. And we've got this view now, which is called, you know, instead of GWP, it's GWA. So global warming actual, which is the amount of CO2 you put in the atmosphere, but it also costs you money. And I think Brian hit the nail on the head there, that, you know, the economics will drive, you know, will drive the environmental piece much faster, because we've got this higher energy cost that we're seeing today.
So Peter, your customers, I guess you're at the position where the economics are making themselves clear. Are customers, what's the word I'm looking for? Are they becoming more conservative in what they're buying, or are you seeing energy?
We are in a tough time at the moment with supply chain issues, and we do get a lot of people asking about A2Ls, but we're not getting as much take up that I would have had anticipated by now. Now, we've been talking about A2Ls and their transition into mainstream for the last 4 or 5 years, and I just get this sense that people are sitting on the fence. I get the sense that they are scared. They don't understand the application. They don't understand that it can be a safe installation with a little bit of due diligence. There's guidance out there. They're not reading up on it. They're just saying, oh, I'm not going to worry about that until such time as it becomes a problem. And we've learned today that there is a big problem coming, and customers really need to think about this and look at their long-term strategy and put something in place now. And it includes training, it includes products. There will be some uplift on product cost, obviously, because of the new technologies, but these product costs will become less as more people adopt them. So it's chicken and egg, really. So all the while everybody's sitting on the fence waiting for this great crash to happen and everybody panicking, it's going to be worse. What we need is people to adopt these refrigerants now and to understand the safe application and get the right training.
We've talked on these events before about the need for education, about devolving education down to everybody, including the smaller end users. I think that one of the consequences of there being a lot of noise around the new proposals is that people start panicking. So one of the side consequences that we're trying to achieve with this event is to not panic everybody and say that there are options available. Don't wait. You know, that's how many question times do we have where we say don't wait, make choices. But I fear that that some people who are noisier than I are able to talk about other alternatives, and then, you know, we need as an industry, I think, to, you know, make a sensible, reasoned approach to the future. I was going to ask Chris sort of the same question, because, you know, your customers, you produce quite a lot of A2L kit recently, and you deal, I guess, with smaller customers as well as the big supermarkets. You know, what's the reaction in the field to the brave new word of A2Ls?
It's a difficult one. I think I think Brian said it, that we need it to become mainstream, but you need to get the step to get into mainstream, which is very, very difficult. And I think Peter also mentioned supply chain, which is a massive issue. And the worry for me is, you know, we're getting to 2024 where there'll be another cut, and somewhere in the pot of refrigerant, someone's going to have to change in order for the quota to be met. And right now, it's very, very difficult to say, exactly which area is going to change. So for the entirety of the supply chain, from compressor manufacturers, equipment manufacturers like us, to distributors like Wolseley, to actually stock and hold this stuff ready for when the change is going to be, it's like which area is going to change. It's really, really difficult. I'm going to be a little bit controversial, I think, maybe. But
right.
My view is that I feel that within the revision of the F-gas regulations, there is new equipment available in certain areas where there isn't potential bans coming forward as an option. And I would like to, it's very, very difficult to sell this to the small end users to say, there's this phase down come in, this is product life, it's going to cost you this over a total cost of ownership. It's a difficult sell. Where if you say, at this point, this equipment is no longer available, even if it's at a point in the future, it's just a much easier sell. So for me, it would be better if there was in areas where you could place a ban, sensible bans, where there is opportunity available, where you've still got all the options for the new types, whether it be A2L, CO2 or hydrocarbons, bans that are at a sensible GWP level, I think will be a good option. But I know there's people that like to let market forces, run the day. But for me personally, I think actually having some signposts of where things can change, I think would really help our industry and make the transition a lot smoother.
So yeah, that's the headline for tomorrow. More bans, says supplier. There's an interesting question coming for Colin, and that is Colin and/or Brian, actually. Could we have a system where there's a penalty for leakage? Perhaps you've already got that for contractors. They're suggesting as an industry, but I'm wondering whether leakage is in the contracts in any way.
I'll take that one first. As it stands at the moment, the penalty that's in the contract for leakage is a financial one on ourselves, just purely on the basis that if we have to pay for the refrigerant to put it back in, that we've allowed to leak out, then that's our penalty. We have heard of schemes whereby other companies have adopted a sort of find a leak and we give you a finder's fee for engineers. We've taken that or taken a slightly different approach to say that as far as we're concerned, all of our operatives and all operatives in the refrigeration world have to sign up to their responsibilities for F-gas, and that is part of your job. So rather than praise people for finding leaks, we will take the other slightly shall we say negative approach and say, if you don't find the leaks, then we'll be having a word with you.
It's the stick rather than the carrot.
Indeed, yes, yeah. We're not that draconian, but yes, that's the sort of the approach that we like to educate our people with. Having said that, they all have totally bought into it and do pride themselves now on having virtually leak-free sites out in the majority of instances. I think our aim is to get to the stage where we're never going to stop the leaks. There's always going to be that catastrophic pipes rubbed through in the ceiling that you can't get to or whatever. But I think the instances of the, shall we say, silly solvable leaks or leaks that shouldn't have happened, I think we've got pretty much on top of them now. So from that point of view, that's how we sort of drive the education through our business. I think one of the key things for me really is in expanding our sort of portfolio of clients. We've spoken to a number of fairly large customers now who really haven't got that much knowledge on sort of the F-gas implications, for themselves, if you like. And they're a little bit surprised, when we go in and talk about sort of F-gas management and what we have to do as a body under those regulations and what their responsibilities is, and it's become quite a shock to us that when you scratch the surface beyond the big supermarket boys that we've known for a long time, there is a very much lack of knowledge out there, and I think that's where we as an industry through FETA, BRA, etc., need to try and get that message out there, because if the customer is more on board with their management of leaks and ensuring that they go to a reputable fridge company that is treating F-gas seriously, I think that will go a long way towards the goal that we all try and achieve.
Thank you. Peter's got his hand up now. I should say that we are just unbelievably already reaching the end of our time, so we're going to do the roundup questions after Peter. So Peter,
all right,
go on.
Thank you, Andrew. I was just going to say, we have a system within the air conditioning market where we have accredited installers. Now, when it comes to packaged refrigeration equipment, we don't. Isn't it time that we started to put something in place similar to the air conditioning industry, so that accredited installers get additional warranty for installing correctly to manufacturers' recommendations? And that would address some of the skills issues that we've got within the industry. I just thought I'd throw that one out there.
Interesting. That's a nice controversial one to lob in just as we're coming to a close. So what I'm going to, but thank you. Interesting point indeed. So we're going to do our sort of general, what one thing should we take away? Should the audience take away? I mean, what I want to say actually at that point, after Colin's comments, was, I think it does behove us as an industry to now, at the moment, with these proposals floating around, if we don't have an industry point of view and perspective and tell that to customers, those outside the industry who can generate bigger headlines will turn their heads. So I think it's a very crucial time for us. Sorry, I was getting a little bit Jerry Springer there. Who's going to be first? I think it's going to be Chris to give us a couple of sentences on what we should be taking away about refrigerant choice and F-gas.
Well, I mean, basically, it's that change is coming. It's coming, really quite quickly now, with the potential of the phase down, the accelerated phase down, which I personally feel DEFRA will be kind of politically boxed in terms of where the European levels are going to be. There's going to be the phase down. It's coming very quickly, and I think really is now the time to be looking at alternatives away from the original HFCs. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to say at that point, what better way to prove how well Brexit has worked than for DEFRA to plough its own furrow on F-gas? There we go. All those who voted for Brexit can lobby their DEFRA people. Anyway, that got political again. Sorry, over to Colin now for a couple of sentences.
Yes, thanks very much. I think the watchword really is that there is no easy silver bullet for this problem. I think we've got to look at obviously GWPs. We've got to look at the efficiencies of systems running on those gases. Training, yes, absolutely. I think just bigging it up a little bit for the UK display case design teams that we have here. I think the other way to look at it as well is to say we've got to get the duty of the overall systems down, and certainly on a supermarket type application, cabinets being one of the biggest chunks of that duty. I think the UK are pushing the boundaries in terms of display case development. We've seen the advent of blades coming onto shelves, obviously doors, etc., and a lot of other work that's going on there dynamically behind the scenes to make those cabinets more and more efficient, so that the systems don't have to produce the amount of duty that's required. And I think having been involved in display case design for now nearly 30 years, we are now really seeing some big changes coming. It's been fairly dormant for 25 years of those 30 years I've been involved in cabinet design, and the last 5 years, we've really seen some big improvements there. So I think UK leading the world in that display case efficiency. So
okay, great, thanks, Colin. Yeah, I don't think you're right. I think you're right. We don't talk enough about the front end of display cases. We get a little bit too obsessed with what's going on in the plant room, but we'll change that today, Colin. There we go. Okay, I'm going to go to Peter next, and then I'm not going to let Mark finish. He's going to go penultimate. I'll let Brian finish on this occasion. So Peter.
Hi. Yeah, I'd like people to take away not just the scenario where everything is going to fall apart and we're going to have a crash with refrigerant prices going through the roof and causing all sorts of chaos. Now, we over the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of product come onto the market. There is a lot of equipment that you can now buy through wholesalers and other parties that can meet the requirements that we need to adopt to work with F-gas and get this phase down implemented. I would encourage people to talk to their technical contacts within wholesalers or consultancies or whatever, and get themselves a little bit more familiar and start to think, yeah, well, let's start off small and then get ourselves to a point where we can start to look at the bigger stuff. Because you can roll the things across, you can get yourself more familiar, you can train up people gradually, and you can get yourself prepared. And the biggest takeaway for me is the preparedness of the industry. We're not prepared at the moment. We really need to get prepared.
Thank you, Peter. Wise words. Okay, Mark, you next.
Yeah, I think we heard earlier about the proposals and the F-gas revision, and whatever happens, things are going to get tighter, you know, and you know, there's going to be lobbying, what it actually looks like eventually, and then in the UK, something's going to follow on from that. So there's definitely something to insure yourself against. So, you know, normally insurance is, oh, well, the building's going to burn down. Well, I'll pay my insurance in case it burns down. In this case, we're basically telling you that it is going to burn down if you don't, you know, do something. So we're saying here, take out some insurance, and those end users, you know, and their contractors that help those end users can help them by ensuring that they have this insurance policy in mind, which is to use a sustainable, you know, a sustainable solution, whichever one it is. And again, all of them have a level of validity, but you've got to choose them correctly, and that's what people have got to be educated about. But you know, take out your insurance. The ones that do will not have to face the issues that Chris was talking about enormous increases in price, lack of availability. You know, I just cannot. When you do the calculations, we just cannot calculate where the service volumes of the kit that's out there today comes from under this phase down. I mean, it just, you know, and Ray said the same thing as well. You just can't make it, the numbers work. So somebody somewhere is going to feel it really badly. So get your insurance. As Peter said, the equipment's getting available now, and it's getting much easier to use. So the barriers are actually not there. There's going to be additional cost, but then anything you're going to do going forward is going to cost you something. But at least it's cost you can plan for, as opposed to ones that you don't plan for. Me done. Thank you.
Were you using lots of semicolons to make that into two sentences? That was stretched it a bit there.
Yes.
There'll be penalties to pay. Brian, would you like to sum up?
Reduction in GWP is inevitable. What is also inevitable is the safety of those chemicals that are going to be our requirements. It's just is what it is. It's, you know, flammable, explosive, toxic refrigerants. Safety number one, that has to go to the top of that agenda as systems are designed, deployed, serviced and maintained, equals good training of engineers, the application of best engineering practice, EN 378, all the good stuff. Technology will be deployed quicker. Environmentally sustainable technology will be deployed quicker if it's financially sustainable. So ensure that as you're going forward, that things like energy consumption effectively remain second on that list to safety, because the more energy efficient it is, the cost of the equipment is one thing, but the life cycle cost, when you calculate those energy savings, very, very quickly add up and become significant.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all you panelists. The second panelist, thank you very much. First panelist, thank you very much. Fascinating discussion as ever. We've tried to run the gamut of subjects around F-gas in the space of 2 hours, which was, as we proved, because it's now 12:10, an impossible task. Probably raise as many questions as answers, but that's the nature of the debate. The debate is ongoing. We are going to share the slides with delegates. We are going to obviously write up the story, put something online. The full recording will be online within a few days. So thanks to you all. Thanks to the audience for being very interactive, very interesting. Right now, Mark, you're spoiling it when I'm trying to do my sum up by raising your hand. What do you want to say?
No, I'm waving goodbye. Thank you.
Oh, you're waving goodbye. I thought you were going to try and add something. I haven't even said thanks to the sponsor, so you've just done it. Thanks to the sponsor, Chemours. The one thing I was going to say as my final Jerry Springer moment is, as an industry, we've got to get through this and get to the other side ourselves as an industry. There's a lot of social media these days. People are on the internet all the time. They hear stuff, headlines, rumors, and other stuff from outside the industry. We have to. We are in charge of our own destiny. So I think it's important for all of us as a supply chain. Thank you very much. And onwards to the Cooling Awards. Good luck to all those who are in face-to-face judging in only a matter of weeks. Goodbye.